January 27, 2025. An AI app built by a Chinese hedge fund hits the top of the American App Store, passing ChatGPT. That same afternoon, Nvidia loses more than $500 billion in market value. To put that number in some kind of scale, it's more than the entire economy of Sweden. Sam Altman went on X. He called DeepSeek's new model an impressive model, particularly around what they're able to deliver for the price. He wasn't wrong. 2 days later, Microsoft made it available on Azure, its cloud platform for developers and enterprises. The cost savings were too good. 13 months later, OpenAI sent a letter to the US Congress. In it, the company accused DeepSeek of ongoing efforts to free ride on the capabilities developed by OpenAI and other US frontier labs. To understand how that happened, we need to go back to Hangzhou and to a man named Liang Wenfeng. His name is Liang Wenfeng. Before he built DeepSeek, he ran a data-driven hedge fund in Hangzhou, the kind that uses algorithms, not instinct, to make bets. That detail is not incidental. In 2021, he started building AI infrastructure on the side. Not a product, not a startup, a research bet. He recruited new graduates, gave them almost no bureaucracy, and pointed them at a single goal: build something that could eventually reach what researchers call AGI, a machine capable of genuine human-level reasoning across any domain. Not by next quarter, eventually. In 2024, he gave an interview. He said, "For many years, Chinese companies were used to others doing technological innovation while we focused on application monetization, but this isn't inevitable." By late 2024, his team published a technical paper on their newest model. The reported cost to train it, $5.6 million. Researchers at Stanford looked at the full picture: the hardware, the people, the years of accumulated infrastructure, and estimated the total cost, including infrastructure, personnel, and years of accumulated R&D, was probably north of $1 billion. That gap is worth sitting with. Then there's the code. DeepSeek released their model publicly. You could download it, run it, take it apart. Researchers around the world did exactly that. What the release did not include was any description of the pipes the app was actually running through. A US House Select Committee report found that DeepSeek's application was transmitting user data through infrastructure tied to China Mobile, a company the US government formally designates as a Chinese military entity. Separately, OpenAI sent a letter to Congress accusing DeepSeek of ongoing efforts to free ride on the capabilities developed by OpenAI and other US frontier labs. DeepSeek had previously stated they had not intentionally used synthetic data generated by OpenAI. Those two statements address different accusations. Neither side walked theirs back. The code was open, the infrastructure never was. And somewhere between those two facts, a decision was being made in Redmond, Washington, by people with every reason to focus on the first one. There's a man named Charles Lamanna. He runs Microsoft's Copilot, the AI layer built into Word, Teams, Outlook, the tools your company probably uses every day. In June 2026, he sat down for an interview. He said, "We have users who do hundreds of tasks a week, but the consequence is the costs can go very high. The more people used Copilot well, the more it cost Microsoft to keep them." Copilot runs on AI models, primarily from OpenAI and Anthropic. Every query costs money to process. Multiply that across the hundreds of millions of people using Microsoft software, and the bill becomes the kind of number that ends up on the agenda at board level. Analysts estimated DeepSeek could shave that cost meaningfully. Lamanna's team needed a cheaper model. DeepSeek was cheaper. When Microsoft announced the Azure integration in January 2025, it published a blog post. The model had, it said, undergone rigorous red teaming and safety evaluations. 18 months later, in June 2026, Lamanna told Axios that any use of DeepSeek would be optional for customers and fully hosted on Azure. Both of those things were presented as reassurances. They were also both technically true. The question most people asked was, why would Microsoft do this? And I understand that instinct, but I don't think it gets you anywhere useful. The more useful question is, what would Charles Lamanna have needed to believe, or not have known to question, for DeepSeek to look like the correct answer in that room? Because in that room, the math was real. The cost pressure was real. The model had passed evaluation. Azure was the hosting environment. Microsoft didn't choose DeepSeek. Its cost structure did. What nobody in that room was discussing, at least not on record, was what DeepSeek needed from this arrangement. And what it needed turns out to be more complicated than a distribution channel. DeepSeek's public story through 2025 was one of momentum. The internal story was different. During that same period, Liang's team had tried to shift their training infrastructure away from Nvidia chips onto Chinese-made alternatives. The cluster kept failing. Engineers and leadership couldn't agree on architecture. Key contributors, people who had built core parts of the model, left for Tencent, ByteDance, and other competitors who offered clearer direction and less friction. The next major release stalled, then had to be rebuilt from scratch. Nobody on the outside knew any of this. This is not how a company presents itself when it's seeking a $20 billion price tag from investors like Alibaba and Tencent, which is exactly what DeepSeek was trying to do. Microsoft's Azure integration wasn't just a distribution deal, it was a credential, the kind you show in a funding room to make internal chaos invisible. Meanwhile, Liang had given interviews saying DeepSeek's goal had always been AGI, that the company was uninterested in building products. Then came the fundraising rounds. In January 2025, Sam Altman called DeepSeek's model an impressive model, particularly around what they're able to deliver for the price. 13 months later, OpenAI sent a letter to Congress describing DeepSeek's work as ongoing efforts to free ride on the capabilities developed by OpenAI and other US frontier labs. Liang had said China needed to stop free riding on Western innovation. OpenAI said DeepSeek had done exactly that. I don't know which is true. I'm not sure anyone outside a few secure briefing rooms does. The word was the same. They needed each other for reasons neither could say publicly. What both sides could agree on was that the model worked, and what that model actually contained, beneath the open source license, beneath the Azure wrapper, beneath Microsoft's assurances, is what I want to look at next. The model Microsoft was testing for deployment inside Copilot. Not what the press release says about it, not what the blog post says, what the documents say. The first layer is architecture. When you use an AI tool, your query goes somewhere to be processed. Microsoft said DeepSeek would run on Azure. That part is true. But where your data travels afterward is a different question. The House Select Committee's report found that DeepSeek's application routes user data through infrastructure tied to China Mobile. Not a Chinese company in general. China Mobile specifically, the company the US government has formally designated as a Chinese military entity. That designation carries real legal weight. It means US investors are prohibited from holding China Mobile stock. It means US federal agencies are prohibited from using their networks. It apparently does not mean the DeepSeek application itself can't route user data through their infrastructure. The second layer is what researchers started calling the censorship architecture. Most AI systems have content filters, logic built into the model telling it what not to say. That's standard. What's not standard is where the filtering sits and whether it's disclosed. Someone doing independent analysis of DeepSeek's code found a module that wasn't in any public documentation, wasn't part of the open source release, and wasn't mentioned in any integration guide. It was a layer beneath the layer you could inspect. Researchers named it Purple Mountain, after the observatory outside Nanjing. It was filtering outputs in ways that weren't disclosed to the companies integrating the model, including Microsoft. Microsoft's Azure blog said the model had undergone rigorous red teaming and safety evaluations, a process where security experts spend weeks trying to find dangerous outputs, attempts to manipulate the AI, false information, harmful patterns. I don't doubt the red team worked. Red teaming finds what it's designed to look for. The House Select Committee's public report, released in June 2026, reached different conclusions. It described DeepSeek as a profound threat to our nation's security. I want to say something carefully here, and I want to say it from beside you, not above you. There's a version of this story where I sit here and say, Microsoft should have known better. The negligence is clear, the accountability is obvious. I've spent a long time with these documents. I'm not sure I believe that version. If you are Charles Lamanna, if you are running a product used by hundreds of millions of people, facing cost pressure that is structurally real, presented with a model that passed your internal security review, offered with assurances about Azure hosting. I don't know what decision I would have made in that room. The information that would have changed the decision came in a public report, released after the decision had already been made. That's not an excuse. In June 2026, the US Department of Commerce finished its review of DeepSeek. They had the authority to add it to the entity list, the mechanism that cut Huawei off from American supply chains, that ended Huawei's ability to buy American chips and partner with American companies. They chose not to use it. The next day, Axios reported that Microsoft was actively testing a fine-tuned version of DeepSeek for deeper integration into Copilot. No final decision had been announced, still under exploration. That was June 17, 2026, one day after the Commerce Department decided not to add DeepSeek to its restricted entities list, the same mechanism that cut Huawei off from American supply chains. They had the authority. They chose not to use it. That announcement came 17 months after the Azure blog post that called the model's safety evaluation rigorous. Liang Wenfeng gave an interview in November 2024, 2 months before R1 launched, and said something I've been thinking about ever since. He said, "For many years, Chinese companies were used to others doing technological innovation, while we focused on application monetization. But this isn't inevitable." He wasn't talking about America. He was talking about China, about the habit of waiting for someone else to build the thing, then figuring out how to sell it. But I keep reading that quote and thinking about it from the other direction. Because if Liang's critique of Chinese companies is, you let others do the innovation, then monetized it, then what do you call what happened here? A Chinese model, built on techniques developed at American labs, absorbed into American enterprise software, generating cost savings for American corporations. While routing user data through infrastructure, the US government had already flagged as a national security risk. Who was waiting for whom to do the innovation? Who ended up monetizing what? Satya Nadella said, in a different context, a frontier without an ecosystem is not stable. He meant that cutting-edge capability, without the distribution channels, the enterprise contracts, the developer communities surrounding it, eventually collapses. You can't hold a frontier position alone. Microsoft had the ecosystem. DeepSeek had the capability for a fraction of the cost. The deal made sense for both of them, in their respective rooms, with their respective pressures, making their respective calculations. The Commerce Department's question was whether this particular arrangement carried enough risk to act. They said, not enough. The model was optional. The incentive never was.